I found this two-part English cabinet at a local thrift store and instantly fell in love with it. The low price of 600 Swedish krona was obviously helpful in the decision of buying it, but never did I think it would take me over 30 hours to refinish it. This English cabinet is made of two parts and has some beautiful details on the glass doors, and the shelves inside the upper part are made of glass as well. Before I started working on the upper part of the cabinet, I made sure to remove all the glass shelves and doors, which will make it way easier for me to sand and later paint each and every corner of this piece. I also know my luck, and surely something would go wrong if I didn't remove these first. Since this cabinet has been standing in my garage for way too long, it has collected lots of dust and spider webs, and I don't want any of that to clog my sandpaper or to get into the wood grain. So to clean this piece, I'm just using warm water and soap. Once the cabinet was clean enough for me, I went in with 120 grit paper and sanded every single detail on this piece. Since this cabinet has some very thick varnish, I wanted to make sure that the paint is gonna stick properly, and I can do that by sanding everything. To prime this piece, I'm using my all-time favorite primer, Zinsser Bin. This time I'm also trying out a new spray gun from Wagner. I've seen other furniture flippers hype this spray gun so much, so I had to try it for myself. The only problem is that I have a different model than what can be bought in US. The model I'm using is W150. And I have to be honest with you, at first I didn't like it very much. The paint was splashing a little bit too much for my liking, and it left a little bit of a orange peel feeling. It took me quite some time to get used to it, but I figured out how to work with this spray gun. Although I have decided I will use it only for my primer. The lower part of this cabinet was way more tricky than the upper part. The varnish felt even thicker than on the upper part, and I knew sanding it off wasn't an option. I started by removing all hardware, which I will later clean in white vinegar. Like I said, sanding it all off wasn't an option, but luckily I have some fancy tools that will help me out. I used this detailed cardboard scraper to scrape off all the small details and edges. Next, I used a regular cardboard scraper to scrape off all the doors and the rest of the cabinet. I actually found out about cardboard scraper through Instagram, and honestly, I can't even believe I worked without it for 2 years. This tool helps me remove any type of varnish, which means I don't have to use chemical stripper as often. But there is always a but. When it comes to drawers like these ones, where the wood is a little bit softer or teak that can be easily damaged, you have to be very careful using a scraper, or just use a sander instead. Next, I flipped the body of this cabinet back up and sanded the top to make sure it's super smooth. Since Raiden has never spray painted furniture before, this was a prime time to teach him that. As you can see, I prefer to spray in one direction all the way through, and that way I can make sure the finish will be nice and even. Once the primer was set and dry, I scuff sanded the entire piece using 240 grit paper. Sanding in between coats of paint is super important to make sure the surface will be smooth like baby skin, and of course, the higher the grit, the smoother the surface. For the outside part of this cabinet, I decided to use a warm beige grey color. Only this time I'm using my Pneumatic Spraygun. When the first coat of paint was dry, I found this scratch on the side of the cabinet. To fill that in, I'm using a simple wood filler that will dry in about 2 hours, which I will paint over later on. To create a nice contrast, I'm using a light grey color on the inside of the cabinet. I chose this color for the inside because it's lighter and the decoration that will be displayed will pop out against the light shade. Once both the lower and upper part of the cabinet was done, it was time to take care of the glass doors. And as always, I followed the same procedure. Remove hardware, sand, prime and paint. Only this time I had to be extra careful not to destroy the glass part, because I don't even want to know how much it would cost me to put in new glass. I also decided to spray paint the doors and didn't want to spend hours and hours on taping off the glass where I didn't want any paint. And I've seen many use so-called H2O liquid mask, which is basically a liquid that hardens on the glass and protects it from paint. But as you may already know, I live in Sweden, which means there is so much we cannot ship here. But I did my own research, basically googling for 2 hours straight and found this liquid mask that's usually used on cars to mask off any parts that shouldn't be painted. And let me tell you, my research gave results, because this product is 8 out of 10. I still wish it was a little bit thicker, because that will be much easier for me to apply, but I'm still so happy to find anything here in Sweden. And once the product was dry enough, I went in with my primer and later on with my paint. The sole reason I decided to use liquid mask instead of taping off the glass was to save time, but now that I had to remove the mask, I'm not so sure I saved any time at all, to be honest with you. These doors are rich in details on both sides, and because of that it took me a few hours to peel off the product. But I still would use this product as it was easy to apply, and I even think it protected the glass better than tape would do. Also, look how satisfying it is to peel it all off. Oh my god. My smart idea of the day was to clean the hardware in white vinegar. I soaked it all for about 24 hours and it worked all fine for the hinges, but it totally destroyed the knobs that sat on the doors and drawers. I guess it wasn't made of brass like I thought. And like I said before, I live in Sweden, which means I don't have the same amount of products to choose from like there is in US. Ideally, I would replace these knobs and buy new ones, but that wasn't possible. So instead, I painted it all with golden paint. Now let me remind you how this cabinet looked before. Old and tired, but once you see the after, you won't believe it's the same cabinet. I absolutely love how it turned out. The warm grey on the outside with the matching golden details and the light grey on the inside. It got a well-deserved makeover, but it took me 40 plus hours to refinish it, so I'm not really sure I will be doing anything like that anytime soon.